In February of 2017, Delphi, Indiana was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. A small town, quiet streets, familiar faces, the kind of community where people waved at each other without thinking, where parents didn't imagine danger waiting in the woods behind a public trail. On February 13th, two teenage girls, Abigail Williams and Liberty German, were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge to enjoy a day off from school. They never came home. By nightfall, panic spread through the town. Volunteers searched with flashlights. Parents waited. Police organized grids. But the trail, once a place for family walks and photos, became something else entirely. The next day, the girls were found. And from that moment on, Delphi would never be the same. Investigators moved quickly. They secured the area. They asked the public for help. And then something extraordinary happened. Liberty German's phone revealed audio and video of the man police believed was responsible. A grainy image. A man walking. A short command spoken calmly. That recording would be played millions of times. Analyzed endlessly. Burned into the public consciousness. The man became known simply as Bridge Guy. Years passed. Leads poured in. Tips flooded hotlines. Sketches were released, revised, debated. Entire online communities formed around the case. But no arrest came. 5 years went by. Then 6. Delphi lived under a shadow. People locked doors earlier. Parents watched more closely. And a question lingered in the air. How could someone do this and disappear so completely? In October of 2022, that question finally cracked. Police arrested Richard Allen, a local man, a pharmacy worker, someone who lived just minutes from the trail. The shock was immediate. People who had passed him in grocery stores stared at old photos in disbelief. This wasn't a drifter. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone who blended in. According to court records, Allen had placed himself near the bridge that day years earlier. A statement that once meant nothing now meant everything. As evidence unfolded, the case shifted from mystery to reckoning. And then came the trial. Jurors heard how investigators connected Allen to the scene, how items recovered over time aligned, how witness statements and forensic findings built a picture prosecutors said pointed in one direction. But perhaps the most unsettling moments came not from physical evidence, but from Allen himself. Recorded jail calls were played in court. Calls where he allegedly made statements that stunned everyone listening. Confessions, prosecutors argued. His defense pushed back, claiming mental deterioration, pressure, and misinterpretation. The courtroom became a battleground not just over guilt, but over reality itself. And while the world focused on the man at the defense table, another figure remained mostly silent. His wife. For years, she had lived beside him, shared holidays, shared routines, shared a life no one suspected held this kind of darkness. As the trial unfolded, the public asked a question they always ask in cases like this. How could she not know? When the verdict came back guilty, Delphi exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was grief settling into permanence. Richard Allen was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Justice, the law said, had been served. But the story wasn't finished. Because after the trial, after the sentencing, after the cameras began to fade, his wife finally spoke. Before we continue, if you find yourself drawn into this story, if cases like this matter to you, take a second to like this video. It helps more people hear these stories, and it keeps this channel going. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what she said would divide the public all over again. And that's where it gets more interesting. When Richard Allen was arrested, the world saw a headline. But his wife experienced something very different. She experienced the sound of a knock that changed her life forever. According to her account, police didn't arrive with drama or shouting. They arrived with quiet certainty. Questions she never imagined would be asked. A reality she never imagined would exist. She says she felt confusion first, then disbelief, then fear. Not fear of him, fear of everything collapsing at once. Because in her mind, the man they were describing was not the man she married. In the docuseries, her voice is calm, but strained. controlled in a way that suggests someone holding themselves together moment by moment. She describes her husband as ordinary, reserved, struggling at times, yes, but human, not violent, not cruel, not capable of something so monstrous that it would scar an entire town forever. And that's the first thing that angers people, because to the public, the crime feels so obvious in hindsight, so clear, so proven. But to her, hindsight didn't exist yet. She talks about replaying memories over and over, searching for signs that weren't there. Conversations, expressions, bad days that felt meaningless at the time. She says there were no confessions, no sudden changes that screamed danger, no moment where she thought, this man could do something unforgivable. And when people hear that, many don't believe her. They ask how someone could live beside a killer and not know. What they don't ask is how denial works when the alternative destroys your entire sense of reality. In the series, she admits something quietly devastating. She says believing he was innocent felt easier than believing her life had been a lie. That sentence alone explains more than most courtroom arguments ever could. When the jailhouse calls surfaced, calls where prosecutors say Richard Allen admitted to the murders, her response wasn't anger. It was grief. She didn't hear a confession. She heard a broken man unraveling under pressure, isolation, and mental collapse. She clung to the belief that what he was saying wasn't truth, but desperation. And even now, after conviction, she holds that line. She says loving someone doesn't stop instantly because the world tells you to. It doesn't shut off like a switch. That love becomes a source of shame, ridicule, and attack. Her name vanished from public life almost overnight. Friends distanced themselves. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Online strangers decided who she was without ever meeting her. Some accused her of knowing everything. Others accused her of choosing him over the victims. Very few allowed space for the idea that she could be both innocent and devastated. She talks about isolation as if it's a physical place, a room where the walls are made of judgment and silence. She stopped going places she once enjoyed, stopped answering messages, stopped defending herself because no defense ever felt enough. The internet doesn't want nuance. It wants villains and heroes, and she didn't fit neatly into either. She insists she cooperated fully with investigators, that she never protected him from law enforcement, that she never destroyed evidence or lied to police, and that's supported by the fact that she was never charged. Still, the court of public opinion handed down its own sentence. Lifetime association, lifetime suspicion, lifetime grief without permission to grieve. At one point in the docuseries, she says something that lingers long after the episode ends. She says, "I lost my husband. Even if the world thinks I shouldn't mourn him." That line splits audiences in half. Some hear denial, others hear trauma, because losing someone doesn't always mean believing they're innocent. Sometimes it means accepting that the person you loved no longer exists, or maybe never existed at all. And that realization can be unbearable. Before we continue, if you're still listening, it means stories like this matter to you. Take a moment to like this video. It helps these conversations reach people willing to think deeper than headlines. And if you want to stay with this case through every layer, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. Because what makes this story even harder is what comes after denial. She lives in a world where every headline reopens the wound. Every appeal mention drags her back into scrutiny. Every new detail forces her to choose again between belief and reality. And she knows, even if she never says it out loud, that the truth may never feel survivable. That's the quiet tragedy no verdict addresses. Because while the justice system deals in guilt and innocence, human beings deal in attachment, memory, and loss. And then there's the backlash. People say she should have known, that she should have seen something, that ignorance is impossible. But experts will tell you something uncomfortable. The closer you are to someone, the harder it is to see them clearly, especially when seeing them clearly destroys you. She is not on trial, but she will never stop being judged. And that leads to the most painful question she never directly answers. If the evidence is true, if the confessions were real, if the man she loved did commit those murders, What does that make her? That question hangs unanswered, and it sets the stage for what comes next. Because in Part 3, emotion collides with evidence. The courtroom strips away belief. The jailhouse calls speak for themselves. And the case leaves behind a question that should make every listener uncomfortable. How well do we ever truly know the people closest to us? By the time the trial began, belief no longer mattered. The courtroom wasn't interested in who Richard Allen had been as a husband, a co-worker, or a familiar face in Delphi. It was interested in facts. And once those facts began stacking up, the atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted. Prosecutors walked the jury back to February 13, 2017. The bridge, the trail, the moment captured on a phone that would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in modern true crime. They reminded jurors that the voice giving commands wasn't distorted by rage or panic. It was calm, controlled, ordinary. Witnesses described seeing a man matching Allen's appearance near the trail that day. Someone who didn't stand out. Someone who blended in. And then came the detail that locked the timeline into place. Richard Allen had placed himself there. Years earlier, he told investigators he was on the trail that afternoon. At the time, it meant nothing. At trial, it meant everything. The defense tried to slow the momentum. They raised questions about investigative mistakes, about tunnel vision, about alternative suspects that were never fully explored. They pointed to Allen's deteriorating mental health while in custody. They argued that a man under extreme psychological stress can say things he doesn't mean. That context matters. Then the prosecution played the jailhouse calls, and the room went still. On those recordings, jurors heard a voice that didn't sound frantic. They heard a man speaking plainly. According to prosecutors, he said the words no defense team ever wants a jury to hear. I did it. Not once, multiple times, to different people, in different conversations. The defense pushed back hard. They argued those statements were the result of isolation, untreated mental illness, and pressure. They said this wasn't a confession, it was a collapse. But prosecutors asked a simple question. Why would an innocent man confess repeatedly to the most horrific crime imaginable? Why would he do it when the stakes were already life-ending? And that question lingered. Then came the physical evidence. Not flashy, not cinematic, but methodical. Prosecutors walked jurors through how certain items were connected to the scene, how timelines overlapped, how the probability of coincidence shrank with every detail. None of it alone was enough. Together, it was overwhelming. The psychological battle became the heart of the case. Was Richard Allen a manipulator hiding in plain sight for years? Or was he a broken man pushed into saying things that weren't true? Jurors watched him closely. His posture, his expressions, the way he reacted or didn't as evidence was presented. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. It was heavy, because everyone understood what was at stake. Justice for two girls, and the permanent destruction of multiple lives. When closing arguments ended, the jury didn't rush. They took their time, and when they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty. Richard Allen showed little reaction. No outburst, no collapse, just stillness. The judge sentenced him to spend the rest of his life in prison. 130 years. A number so large it almost stops feeling real. For the families of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, there was no celebration. Only a measure of closure in a story that never should have existed. For Delphi, the weight didn't lift. It settled. And for Richard Allen's wife, the verdict marked a different kind of ending. Not resolution, finality. Because now belief had to coexist with reality. And that's where this case leaves us. With a question that no evidence can answer completely. How does someone live beside a person capable of this? And never know? Or did they know somewhere deep down and choose not to look? Experts will tell you that evil rarely announces itself. It adapts. It blends. It waits. And sometimes, it wears the face of someone trusted. If this story has stayed with you, if you're still listening, take a moment to like this video. It helps these cases reach people who want more than headlines. And if you want more stories that explore not just crime, but the human cost around it, subscribe now. Because the most chilling part of the Delphi case isn't the bridge or the recording or even the conviction. It's the realization that certainty is fragile. That the people we think we know best may still carry secrets we're not prepared to face. And that sometimes, justice answers the legal question, but leaves the human one wide open.